I'm Martyn Ramsey, and welcome to Dominant. This is episode 2 of Hangover, our special on the 1993-94 season. And joining me this week to look at quite a chaotic period in Rangers history that I think goes under the radar a little bit is David Edgar. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you, Martyn. Nice to be here.
You say nice. We've got a lot of scars to unpick in this particular episode. And if
Nice
David,
right now, then.
yeah, it's right. We'll have some joy in the middle. Don't worry.
Yeah, right.
If David's here, that means Alan's here as well. How are we, Alan?
Yeah, really good, Martyn. Just a wee plea from me. Can I get the joy stuff and David can get the other bits and bobs?
Well, we're going to go through it all, boys. We're going to go through it all. We're going to share the pain and some of the joy. Let's start then with Europe, boys. Which we're all anticipating greatly because of what happened last season. If there were some clouds over Govan that summer, but as we discussed last week, then bigger clouds perhaps over Bern. Match fixing, of course, with Marseille, but not only there was some stuff in Warsaw and Lodz like that. Dynamo Kiev were the subject of fraud investigation. So pretty grim weather. But yet, the UEFA president, Leonard Johansson, was quick to sing the praises of that inaugural Champions League and how the money was structured as central funding pot of football associations. All football associations within UEFA were handed 220 grand. I very much respect the major clubs for accepting the rules of the Champions League. If they had to run their own affairs, they would have made more money from television and advertising. This provided us with the means to help restore the balance between the rich and poor. And I'm absolutely certain that if we do not continue this assistance, a crisis will arise and this must be prevented. How much that rich and poor balance stayed in play, we'll have to wait and see. What he also lamented there was the fact that his proposals for the Champions League reform were rejected. He wanted to combine the Champions League and the UEFA Cup into one big competition, bringing in the second, third place teams from these big leagues. And he said, many people within the game are anxious to know how the future will look. I can accept that my original idea is only in the fridge, waiting to be taken out at the right moment. For the working party will reach the same conclusion as I did. Ultimately, they would. 1994, they would break the Champions League into 4 groups to decide the last 8 with only one qualifier. And then in 1997, the Champions League started to invite in non-champions. And we get to see really what Leonard Johansson had in mind. What we sometimes forget about the Champions League between 94 and 97 is that it was cut to 24 teams. There was only one qualifier, 8 seeded teams, including the holder, which meant teams from Northern Ireland, Wales, Ireland, Bulgaria, Rosenborg from Norway, Levski Sofia, of course, we will play in this competition, simply weren't allowed to even take part for 3 seasons. David, this future of European football is going to be pretty convoluted, but we get an early start on what's going to happen here.
Yeah, it was changing rapidly, and there was an awful lot of tinkering with the Champions League over the first decade of it. You'll remember the 2 groups where it was decided that, well, if we're all making this much money off one group stage, we'll make a lot more off a second group stage. Teams varied the amount who could get into it before they eventually settled on where I think it was always going, and I think those Leonard Johansson quotes sort of back that up, that it would go to be a big league tournament basically involving the big leagues and the big clubs. And we now have the situation, of course, where the top 5 leagues get 20 places automatically without a ball being kicked. And of course, because of coefficients, that will never change, because of course they all go into the Champions League and therefore they get the points and it follows on. And that was always, I think, the intention, because UEFA don't particularly care about the smaller leagues. With the best will in the world, UEFA are quite aware that it's unlikely that the Scottish League, the Portuguese League, etc., are all going to go off and form their own Super League. Whereas it was a legitimate concern, and I think especially with the change, it's been mooted since Adam was a boy, since he invented the airplane, I think, that this would happen, that these clubs would end up playing each other. I remember as a little boy, whenever they used to do in the football magazines, the future, they would look ahead. They would always suggest there would be a European league.
Absolutely.
And the big clubs would be playing each other regularly. So I think there was always this anticipation that it was liable to be something that would take place. And of course, it absolutely was, because the money then grew. The bigger clubs who do have that authority, that status, and that threat or ability to threaten, to say, we could all head off, and we saw that, of course, almost come to fruition in 2021.
And it's not gone yet. It's absolutely not.
No, and it hasn't gone away yet, because they want to keep the money that they make from themselves. So now what UEFA have done, and I think that eventually they sort of realised with the Europa League, and initially the UEFA Cup went into a league stage, and it was a slightly odd one. Remember, it was 5 teams, and you wouldn't play home and away. But they sort of realised that, well, hang on, we can still get money to these smaller clubs and make a lot of money for UEFA as well by having a secondary tournament. And now I think we all have to be honest, there is a segregated system in European football. There are clubs who can enter that top competition and expect to do well. There are then a lot of clubs who can enter that second tier of competition, and unfortunately I think we're one of them. And then they've now introduced that third tier as well, with the Conference League.
And that's really what, as you said, what was brewing in the late 80s. I mean, it's not just the preserve of shoot and match to kind of think ahead. Murray was talking, like many chairmen were in the early 90s, it's going to happen. In some way or another, it's going to happen. We want to be part of that. And UEFA were just reacting to that, almost being proactive, actually, and trying to get something that headed that off at a pass. And to be honest, I don't think it's gone, because what we still don't have is something that guarantees that the best in Europe play each other twice a season. And that's, we've talked about this in many different formats, many different shows. The Victorians nailed football competitions with the introduction of a league system. It's the best way of deciding who's the best team. So it's not going away yet. Alan, in that the draw in Bern, and there were good news and bad news. It was suggested for Rangers. The good news that we drew Levski Sofia of Bulgaria. The last time they were in Europe's top competition was 5 years earlier. AC Milan battered them 7-2 in aggregate. But the bad news was that we were unlikely to be seeded. If and when we dismissed the Bulgarian champions, we'd have a seeding of 9, which was just outside, of course, the top 8 where you want to be. And therefore, we could play a tabloid speak, big gun, if we wanted to be back in the Champions League that year, because there were, of course, two qualifying rounds effectively, as it was the year before. Obviously, a bit of confusion at the time about who would represent France. What's going to happen with Marseille? Paris Saint-Germain refused, I think, on commercial grounds to take their position, so it was going to go to Monaco, who didn't have the kind of coefficient, individual coefficient the Rangers had. So Campbell Ogilvie at the time was saying, they've got a lower coefficient than us. They shouldn't be taking our place. It would be academic in the end. But do you remember much about the reaction to that particular draw?
Not really. I mean, I think when we saw who we had, as you say, it wasn't going to be one of, inverted commas, the big guns. So to be quite honest with you, Martyn, naively or whatever, actually pretty positive, in terms of who we're going to play, and especially after what had happened in the previous season, and how well we had actually, kind of gone through. So, no, certainly from my point of view, really getting that side. And I think that's a good point you make as well. Obviously, David Murray and Campbell Ogilvie, at that stage, we were probably still seeing ourselves as one of the biggest clubs in Britain and so on, and thinking we would be part of this ongoing, clearly reality kicked in, and I think we were deluding ourselves even at that point, Martyn. Yeah.
Being in that 8 is the obsession, to be honest. The 8 top seeds, the 8 big boys, and just being outside there was a bit of frustration. The first leg was at Ibrox, 15th of September. Walter Smith, I was talking about Stuart McCall in advance of that game. I would be loath to put him into a game like this without any match practice, he said, 2 days before the tie on the 15th. McCall, after all, just undergone a hernia operation less than a month before. Not only would he play, he would captain the side, as the musical chairs in the Ibrox treatment room showed no signs of stopping. Richard Gough being the latest with yet another muscle injury, this time the groin. Davy Sky were there to cover the game, try to get in on this Rangers kind of feel-good factor after the last season. Andy Gray, I don't know if you remember, providing a tour of the stadium before the game.
Yes.
And quite a few fans, I think, maybe joined him on their sofa because it's a relatively sparse Ibrox that night. Saving their money for those
That
big
is
glamorous ties to come, yeah?
100%. I knew guys who worked in my dad's factory that were exactly, I say my dad, he didn't own it, unfortunately. But yeah, I knew guys who exactly took that point of view that, no, I'm gonna save my money for the group stage, because I think that it's important for us to sort of paint what the view was at the time, and the view was we expected to get into it. I don't think anybody contemplated for a minute that we weren't going to go back in and have a real crack at it. Incidentally, Mark.
Yeah.
You know, and I can't remember any sort of chatter around. And remember, I was a little nerd, so you know, I listened to everything. I read loads of stuff. You know, I'm pretty sure I was a good bellwether of the kind of atmosphere at the time, and there really wasn't this idea of Rangers not getting in. At the start of the season, we thought we will clearly go in. Then we get this tie. And I remember, to get there the previous year, we've knocked out the Danish champions and Leeds United. So Levski Sofia, with no disrespect, don't frighten us in any way, shape or form. And yes, there was just this thing that we were absolutely going to go in. This was, I can't think of a better word. This was a bit of a formality. It was something that we had to go through. Nice, quick, easy win at Ibrox. Go over there, shut up shop, and that would be us done. And I think that this was really, for me, the first real indicator, because I was used to start slowly domestically. So that didn't trouble me. And again, as we've discussed in previous shows, nobody else was winning the league. Just end the story, you know, bar catastrophe, really. So I was looking to this time. This was the first one where I thought, oh, that's different. That's not like the last 18 months in any way, shape or form. This is the first really. You could talk about the CSKA Moscow match, right, and say, well, that was a real disappointment, and it was, but it's a disappointment of a certain level. Like, you know, it was painful losing the Europa League final in Seville, but I still hurt more when we lost at Alloa in the Challenge Cup, because of the circumstances of where you are at the time. So although that had been a disappointment, to then not get it, I mean, this is literally the equivalent of, we are dressed up to go to this party.
Right, everyone expects us to beat Levski, but there's still a second round, and there's this concern that we're not in the top 8. So we could have drawn Milan, we could have drawn Barcelona, we could have drawn Manchester United.
But it never got to that, really. So I don't. There was no real focus on it yet. It would have happened, but again, with the media cycle that was back then, it was pretty much just what was in front of your nose. Was what people paid attention to. So I just remember Levski Sofia, right, get that out the road, and then we could be set up, because again, you know, we had Leeds the previous year, so yeah, we could have a big, and we should have had, incidentally, should have been seeded in that draw, but still, first indication of where UEFA value does in the food chain. But nobody contemplated that there wouldn't at least be that epic tie in that round as there was last year. There was simply no day. And even then, Martyn, you know, like, that's a bit of a Euro. I know it's only maybe 2 ties, but this Euro run, after that long extended one that we hadn't seen in my lifetime, we hadn't done that really, apart from that 87-88 one. We had this big, long, extended run with these loads of games, and to suddenly go, what, that's it? One match at Ibrox and we're done for the whole year, and we've got fucking Dundee United 4 times, and we've got Motherwell 4 times. And I just remember this feeling of the first 2 water seasons were like this multicoloured, huge, big production. It was all, and this was like the season that stretched ahead to me looked like a black and white home movie.
Well, the Levski scout, Ivan Tychansky, I'll give you his full title, Dave, because I know you'll appreciate this, the head of International Department and Public Relations at Levski Sofia. He wasn't particularly impressed. He watched Rangers snatch a late draw at Dens Park. Mark Hateley was the man who did that, only when Dundee were down to 10 men very late on. But he expected the Scottish champions to show a different face when their tie came around. Hateley was moaning after it, said, ideally I'd rather be playing with my old partner. We proved we get goals together, and this mismatch between him and Ferguson continued at Ibrox that night. In the first leg, Rangers were too direct. However, that artillery fire did create some problems for Levski, especially the goalkeeper Oleg Morgan. All 3 goals coming from cross balls that he really should have dealt with. Dave McPherson got the first, and of course Hateley profited with the latter 2. Crucially, however, Alan, it was Goff's absence that caused the fatal issues, really. Twice a 2-goal lead was halved when Rangers just couldn't defend rudimentary cross balls. Both fullbacks, Roberts and Stevens, were the last men to be asked to take care of those balls, but just countless issues surrounding the moves themselves. And Ali Maxwell should have done a lot better with Borimov's header that first pulled the visitors back into the game. And even the reaction, you see Hateley's second, and it's 3-1. It's kind of, right, okay. That's the 2-goal lead again, that cushion. Hateley is a pump, and then there's a kind of laugh about it a wee bit. This is the coast. We might get a fourth. No need for a big fourth. We'll get through to the end. And then this lackluster complacency shambles in the middle of the park cost us yet again, because they obviously nicked another one back. And all of a sudden, this trip where we go and, as David says, shut up shop, hold on to that cushion, becomes one of those Eastern Europe adventures that are fraught with difficulty.
Aye, and it kind of had the feel, Martyn, of, we talked about the Andy Gorham first one, in Europe over the goals at the Celtic end. And I remember that, as you say, 3-1, you're thinking, that's okay, we're back on track now. Down the right-hand side, I don't even know if it was big Duncan Ferguson sort of fell, but it was one of those balls that came in for the right-hand side. And you know how we see it now with Borna, it's like open your body and use your right foot. No, I'll try and move the other way. And Gary Stevens, I'm sure he get caught with his body the wrong way. Yeah. And as you say, it was a big slap in the face, obviously, when that one went in. Although, again, at that time, foolishly, you're thinking, it doesn't matter, we'll go over there and we'll still do the business. What can I say? Yeah.
Well, indeed.
Well, on that, Alan, I remember, and you guys know me, I'm not really a kind of pessimistic Rangers fan, especially not in that era. But I had this kind of inbuilt terror of away goals, and 2, I was like, are we going to score 2 over there? That's going to be difficult. So I remember I don't know what it was, but I just had this fear away goals could prove costly to us. And I remember thinking, 3-1, as you say, even 2-1, because then if you score, you cancel out that advantage. Maybe it was just, as a child, I kind of had this reverence for the away goal and the power of it, because I'd seen these ties decided. And it's a bit of a head scratcher when you're a kid. Well, they're drawing 4 each after 2 matches. Why are they out? Why are they through? So I was slightly in awe of it, and I was just a little concerned. And Maxwell was becoming a bit of a fall guy already, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
There was a show, Craig Ferguson, who has since gone on to enormous success in America, I believe. He was, at the time, a comedian. Remember him, Alan? He was Bing Hitler was his big character.
Yeah, that's right.
He had a show on Saturday nights on BBC just after Sports Scene, and he would do a mix of sketches and topical comedy. And he said, just in, following on from Sports Scene, manager Walter Smith has handed Ali Maxwell a vote of confidence. But he's dropped it. That was, and I remember being quite humorless about that, because I was like, I wasn't used to our players being a joke. I wasn't used to it. And Maxwell, maybe because it'd been hard to make Rangers players the butt of jokes for a while and people were itching to do so, quickly became it. And to the support, he quickly became very much a whipping boy. But also, there was more to it. It's not like now, I mean, we still need scapegoats and we still have guys who will always cop it ahead of others. But with Maxwell, it was deeper. To me, it was more like a, how dare you? Like, this is not how we perform. How dare you come and not be up to the standards we expect?
And I think you've hit the nail on the head as well, as you say, when you think of the standards, obviously Big Woods and then Andy Gorham. So as you say, right away, you're going to get compared to it. I don't think with me at that point in time I had thought, this about him. Obviously, we're going to get into a few games, and then it'll finish off in that regard. But I think at that point in time, what was getting me more was the fact that obviously we had a lot of these key players out, through injury, maybe McCall, Brown, and so on. But our defence, I just thought we were kind of losing daft goals.
All over the shop.
And I don't mean to be, well, maybe I will be, but like Presley and Fraser Wishart, I know he came in and sort of done a job, but he's maybe playing right back, then he's playing left back. And
he's playing wherever he wanted him. To be fair, I think Wishart was absolutely fine for the kind of thing he was asked to do.
What you've got, aye.
But as I said last week...
But Presley, Martyn,
Yeah, I know. But I said last week in our Duncan Ferguson, how do you spend $4 million chat? I think there were issues with the Rangers' defence at the end of that season, and I think you invest in a young Alan McLaren pretty much immediately, but we didn't, and that's done. That complacency on the night, on the pitch, was replicated with the PR department, headed by John Gregg in those days, because those who had their season tickets in the club deck were given a form to apply for tickets for the second round, and that landed on their doormat the day after the match in Bulgaria, by which time Rangers were out. Gary Stevens spoke before the trip. If we play our own parts properly, they have nothing on the evidence of the first match to suggest that they have a great deal, which should worry us. At least he was confident. There were signs. We beat Hibs 2-1 at Ibrox on the Saturday that he was capturing a wee bit of his old form. But the other fullback, of course, David Robertson, was the latest to be injured for the trip to Bulgaria. It's just one man in, one man out at that time. And in truth, to be honest, Stevens wasn't too far wrong. Levski had, done that thing. They had scored reasonably early. Nasko Sirikov, far too much time to get his shot away in the box. And then, parity on the night. They've got the advantage of the away goal. But we got back into it. Durant,
good header,
brilliant header at the back post, brilliant cross by Gary Stevens right before half time. It's level on the evening, and now Rangers are back in track. And the game, if you ever watch any of it, it's quite slow for something with so much riding on it, with so much at stake, and we're into injury time. And to be fair to Maxwell, by the way, has made
2 or 3 cracking saves, Martyn. Yeah.
I can see that. And one from Nikolai Todorov, seeming pretty crucial. The next time Todorov had sight of goal, Maxwell wasn't given a hope in hell. Now, less than a minute of normal time remaining. Smith is off this kind of, I say bench, it's like the bench you had in primary school gym. He's got the big coat on. He is roaring at his defenders not to come up for this corner, just to keep the shape. Durant plays the corner in, it comes out, it comes back to him, still obviously in that area of the ground. And instead of going all the way back into the Rangers half just to recycle the ball and just kind of keep it, he does what's instinctive to him, I guess. He whips in a cross, it's dealt with, ball comes out, and Levski get a free kick in their own half and the chance to launch one final attack. It's a big hit and hope. Rangers lose the first ball, and the second ball's gathered with ease, and it's right into the path of Todorov, 35 yards from goal. Ian Ferguson wrote, he looked up and you could sense he was ready to have a go and didn't have a hope. A goal seemed so unlikely. I can remember saying to myself as he lined up, go on, shoot. And then he did, and he could never have struck a ball better in his life. David, it was an incredible strike, in off the underside of the bar. And this seemingly never-ending story of glory, that previous season of hope and adventure. Who's next? Who's coming to Ibrox in a couple of weeks? Another big name. The lights are on. Fergie talks about, Alex Ferguson used to tell his players at Aberdeen when they were out of tournament early, all you've got to look forward to on a Wednesday night now was Coronation Street, and this hit the players hard.
Yes, it did, because they hadn't contemplated, much like the fans, that it wouldn't. I think there was this assumption that this was it now. After 92-93, this was the company in which we were keeping, and I think it really did hit everybody very hard, especially, as you mentioned, it might have been easier. It would have been easier had we gone out to AC Milan in the next round. You can understand that. But this is a side that Rangers should have beaten, should have been capable of. It's not the wonder goal that knocks us out. It's the two disasters at Ibrox. As Alan says, it's the piss poor defense. I mean, it literally is. It's the away goals. I mean, it's the piss poor defending. And this is the story of this season of doing enough and getting by. Well, that's fine. But as we all know, on the nights where you don't quite do enough, it means failure. And that's exactly what happened over these two matches. They weren't a good side, Levski. You couldn't claim that, this was not like back in the day when a team would come from behind the Iron Curtain. One of the things I always feel looking back in that era is that our players were still very much, never mind stuck in an 80s mindset, Martin, our players were still stuck in the same mindset that Scottish players had in the 50s, 60s and 70s, which was, I guarantee you that the Levski players all knew a lot more about their direct opponent than our boys did. I guarantee it. I just, because not because of a failing on Walter Smith or anybody's part, but because we just didn't do that. We didn't care. It was exactly what Gary Stevens said. Well, we're better than them, so we'll just turn up and be better than them, and then that'll be that. There's no tactical plan. The Durant thing is, I think, quintessentially British naivety in Europe. This did not just affect us, incidentally. We didn't have the street smarts that the European sides did. And the way that anything that wasn't strictly Corinthian was sort of referred to by British commentators is almost like it was cheating. Like, as you say there, where you get the ball, you take it to the corner, or you run it back to the goalkeeper, anything like that. It wasn't seen as sensible. It was seen as, well, why wouldn't you go for goal?
Yeah.
Because you don't need to. You need to win the game. But we saw that as something vaguely threatening. And
Look at Manchester United in the next round. Manchester United, their first attempt at the European Cup, Champions League for 25, 26 years, whatever it is. They got Galatasaray in the second round, and it's 3-3 at Old Trafford. A crazy game with no
so open.
Yeah, no pause, no nuance, no just intelligence. Really, it was just hear them, scare them.
We're just going to go out and we're going to do what we always do. We're not going to make any allowances for the fact this is Europe. We're not going to make any allowances. We don't have a clue who these Bulgarian lads are or these Turkish lads are. And it was that I don't know. You want to say almost a lack of preparation. But as I mentioned, you can't really put the blame on the management quite as much as you would do now.
I mean, these are not watching opponents, and I mean, Willie Waddle did more.
Waddle had the wee cards and all that, didn't he, in the 70s?
I mean, these are not secrets.
Walter would send somebody to watch them, but what I mean by that is, see, in terms of things like dossiers to the players, that wouldn't happen. The scout would just report back and say to Walter, this is what they do, that's how they play, blah blah, and that was it. Really, that was it. Yeah, we just the thing is, Ferguson learned, and by his second spell, Walter had learned. He needed the time away from that arena to process it and to come up with something a bit better. But back at this stage, it was very much, this is a team who train in a public park. Let's not forget that, and train at a cricket club. And we were going up against sides who didn't have our budget, didn't have our status, but they were just simply
drilled. And you would see what Bulgaria would do, in fairness, at the World Cup. They would be, third?
Yeah.
There's a few
they
players.
Were respected. They were respected. I mean, even back then, Alan, you'll remember 88, Scotland beat them to, ironically, send Republic of Ireland to the Euros. But, we did respect Bulgarian football. It's not like even now. Bulgaria did have good players, and they were known, they were a fixture of international tournaments. But even so, I just don't think that it had occurred to anyone at Rangers and at Manchester United, funnily enough, that this wouldn't happen. And I think that we looked past opponents. Whenever you do that, you're in trouble.
David, there's a kind of high level thing here, and going even before the 80s and 70s. I remember Scotland. We used to go to Scotland games. We'd get beaten by Spain, and we were all up in arms. Imagine getting beat by Spain or Portugal. I know things moved on, but there was that kind of high level thing. And again, like you've said, there's this whole kind of oh no, we don't fall in the ball. I mean, Martyn talked about it. See that stadium? If you've got a minute to go, I could think of plenty of places to. And then you get, later on, you'll have, say, Advocat. When Advocat came, I remember him saying we're playing against the Germans, and he used the word professional. He said we need to be far more. But again, I don't know, there was this kind of top level thing. Rangers didn't quite, because we should comfortably, shouldn't we have been able to, play out 5 minutes or whatever, eh?
Yeah. For the rewards on offer, it's not difficult. And yes, you can get done by
A freak.
done by a freak hit. That happens.
If you haven't mitigated that margin, we're talking about
exactly,
this
it's a
on
thin
a
margin.
weekend
And
where
you had the ball, and look, we still see it. Scott Arfield against Benfica a couple of seasons ago. It's just
Barry Ferguson at home to Bayern Munich.
It's just things that European coaches would not stand for, that British coaches don't seem to notice or bother with at times, because our players essentially, I don't think this happens now actually, because kids get drilled from 6, 7, 8 in the way that they have done on the continent for decades now. But certainly in this period, we still had boys who at heart were guys that played football in the park, and there was something endearing about them. We've spoken before about the relationship between the players and the crowd, and that wavelength and that connection, and it came from that. But it did mean that when you played these, and our distaste for them with their passbacks and their tactics and remember the shit that Arsenal, who were very successful in Europe around about this period, remember the shit they got?
Arsenal.
Yeah. People in Britain hated that, because it's like, oh look, they just shut that game down there. Yeah, but they won it.
Even Liverpool, Liverpool, when they dominated Europe at one point, soon as used to talk about, the amount of times Liverpool just won 1-0 in some of these games, and they would just keep possession, and they would say, we're looking for the dope, we hunt the dope, and it's the person that switched off, and they play about. But even some of the clubs had it, but we certainly weren't. We were definitely naive, weren't we?
Yeah, but we celebrated that thing the year before,
know.
for sure, and it carried us all the way, or nearly all the way. It provided a bit of schadenfreude for the rest of Scottish football, as the all-conquering Rangers kind of finally brought down a peg or two. Some got a little carried away. The Radio Clyde DJ Tiger Tim Stevens, and his other role as a stadium announcer at his beloved Parkhead, asked the Celtic support to observe a minute's silence for Rangers following the news of the Leskie result. He was promptly sacked. Trevor Stephen describes it as a catastrophe, morale shattering. He said, we felt a wee bit sorry for ourselves and a bit down, and the league performances suffered a little bit around that time. A little bit is an understatement. From that 0-0 draw at Parkhead in August to a 2-2 draw at Tynecastle on the 3rd of November, where Rangers were 2-0 ahead, Rangers won only 3 league games out of 12. By far the worst run of league form in this period, so you'd have to go back pre-Souness to find worse. You'd have to go to 2005 to see it again under McLeish. And there were 1-1 draws at Dens Park that I mentioned. There's a 1-1 draw at Starts Park against Wraith Rovers. Needed an own goal to put Rangers ahead. Even a 1-1 draw at home to Partick Thistle. Hateley should have made it 2-1. He had a penalty saved, but he had a brilliant free kick to bring us level. And again, a lot of the chat was around the style. How can Dundee and Partick Thistle and Wraith knock it about quite well, where Rangers, with these two giants up front, are going direct all the time? Smith reacted following Saturday with the home leg in Sofia, and the midweek being the final straw for that Hateley-Ferguson partnership. He dropped his new signing, and he replaced him with a very promising 17-year-old called Charlie Miller. Given the casualty list, he felt he had no other option but to throw Miller in for his debut at Pittodrie was a big move. Smith was asked about Ferguson's place in the bench. He just said, I picked the team. When he's asked about the worrying form, he said something about players need to do less talking, more playing. Rangers were battered, beaten within 30-odd minutes by an Aberdeen team that were slicker, quicker, better, absolutely more into it. 2-0 up inside 35. Ian Jess was rampant, involved in both goals. Maxwell again, not particularly impressive. Presley again,
own goal.
Rangers again, dull, heavy-footed when their opponents were anything but. Look, defeats at Aberdeen can happen, but what was to happen next was worse. Motherwell visited Ibrox on the 6th of October, 1 point ahead in the league table at this moment in time. Wee bit better, and an Ian Ferguson goal in the second half put Rangers ahead, but 13 minutes remaining, it fell apart. Young Colin Scott was in goals. He was the stand-in for Maxwell, who of course was the stand-in for Gorham. Could do nothing. Dreadful marking mistakes, gifted Tommy McLean's side both points. Rangers were 7th, Alan, after 10 league games, and the magic and excitement of that previous season really was fading fast. After the draw at Wraith, one fan was heard to shout, "Why don't you resign, Smith?" And even a club as demanding as Rangers, it takes quite a nosedive to erode that kind of credit. But I guess when you look at that run, and we're going to, in a few weeks, talk about the week from hell at the start of 94-95.
Yeah, I remember it well.
This run of 2 months, 3 wins in 12. It gets, I don't think people talk about it enough. I can only begin to imagine how it would be digested now. But this really, we talk about a foregone conclusion. And fans still are saying, right, we'll kick in eventually, but we're 7th. I mean, at places here. It's a dreadful run.
It was. And Dougie Arnott, of all people as well, I think he got both of the Motherwells. And as a guy from Wishaw, you can just imagine how I felt with that. But no, it was terrible. But as I say, all over the park, I mean, we were still having chances.
By the way, he was always good against us.
I mean, Big Butcher, I think Butcher said he was one of the most difficult opponents. I mean, Dougie Arnott, he was, wasn't he?
But just always good against us.
But
he turned it up for Motherwell, to be fair.
He was actually a very good Motherwell player. It's just I hated that wee bastard because I hate people he played like the kind of archetypical wee shite, didn't he?
You just keep annoying him and nipping. And
exactly. Yeah. Not his fault, Martin. It's mine. But I just didn't care for him.
Oh, it's like me and Joe Miller, isn't it? That we bastard blowing me kisses. But no, well, just even the blowing the kisses. But no, just absolutely horrible time. In the back of my mind, again, you're thinking, because of previous and because of our squad, and as you rightly say as well, Martin, but even if you looked at the points, they were all kind of taking points off each other.
Well, I'll get to that, a saving grace, but Rangers taking care of their own business.
It's terrible.
I mean, the Aberdeen game, I was up there that day, and again, we're talking about young Scottish talent, David, and we've gone out. Ferguson is an exciting player. We've gone through it all. I'm not going through it again. McLaren would have been another one. Ian Jess ran that game. Yeah. He ran that game, and Rangers looked like ghosts at Pittodrie. Never mind the Motherwell. That was a freak in 13 minutes, I suppose. We never get started. He's chucked Charlie Miller in, 17 years old, into that kind of lion's den, I guess. Smith's out of control a wee bit at this moment.
Yeah, I hate that idea. Because what you say before it, we all do it, is, if he's good enough, he's old enough, right? We all do that, and we don't remember that, well, yeah, he's good enough to be in the Rangers first team, absolutely, but there are places to make your debut. He has zero experience of which to fall back on, and you're putting him into, especially then, what is one of our most difficult environments. So it's not fair. You're also pitching him in. This is the other thing about bringing in youngsters when you're playing badly. How fair is that? Because you've got guys there who are struggling for their own form. How are they supposed to be able to help, guide someone through this? So it's doubly unfair on the kid. Now, Charlie Miller, the type of person that he has, type of personality that he has, is strong enough, I think. But I'm really not a fan of it. There are games you introduce players in, and there are games that you don't. And I would suggest that, especially this era, that was one of them. Jess was a guy, that a lot of us liked back then. Jess's career peaks in this period. Yeah. You know, there'll be moments after this. There's zero doubt about that. But the running joke is, of course, he's one day still he's going to fulfill his potential. And that's because it was true. I mean, for people who didn't see him in the early 90s, he was a terrific player. You know, he had vision, he had style, he had a bit of grace, he could pass.
There was one final, David, wasn't it one of the Aberdeen finals we played, and he was absolutely outstanding. I think that's where everyone get his attention, didn't they?
It was one of the ones they won, actually. It would have been 89.
89, and he was terrific. And you just, we did that equation that we tend to do in Scotland. Not so much now, thankfully, but if he's this good now, he will automatically be much better in the future. Whereas we didn't tend to notice, again, that one of the reasons that players in the continent got better was because they moved to different coaches, different countries, they learned different styles, they adapted their game, etc., etc. We just thought it happened by osmosis. You know, if he's this good at 20, he'll be X amount times better at 25. So he did look like someone to be in the signing that we go for. There are two things that save Walter here, Martin. One is, Alan's touched upon it there, they're all cutting each other's throats, and the inevitability that Rangers are going to win the league. Also coupled with the suspicion that if we need to, we'll sign somebody. really, that there was that suspicion there. The other thing is that David Murray didn't want to sack him. So any sort of chatter like that, journalists would get a phone call from Murray. You wouldn't be on the private plane to Jersey, and you toned it down. Also, the journalists liked Walter Smith. They weren't going to go after him unless they were, shall we say, culturally opposed to all that he stood for. So the discussion didn't get serious apart from after the game. These days, you're absolutely right, it would, because that fan who shouted, "Why don't you resign?"
Would say it
would be social media and so on.
Would say it on Twitter, and the discussion would go on, and papers would have to report it. But back then, that didn't happen. You got your frustration out of the game. You went and had a couple of pints. Next day, you forgot about it. You get back on it.
You went to
and
work,
I think, and I think the sense of inevitability that it can't go on for much longer. But every week you turned up during this period thinking this will be the day. This will be the day that it turns. Already, my dad, now, this maybe colours my view of Duncan Ferguson. My dad was an enormous Mark Hateley fan. And therefore, from before Rangers, incidentally, from his time as an England player. And he had said to me, we don't need him, and he won't be able to play with Hateley. Now, to me, I just thought, well, Hateley is this good, so clearly, you get someone who can do what Hateley can do, and you play him next to him. But my dad's like, well, who plays next to him? And I said, well, Ali. He says, well, and when Ali's fit, who's playing? And I said, well, Ali and Hateley. He goes, so why have we spent $4 million on this guy? And this to me is emblematic, and this is not about, before you go, we did it all last week, this is not about Duncan, this is about Walter. It's emblematic to me of this season. Square pegs, round holes, nothing quite fitting, trying things just out of desperation, no clear overall plan, looking at each other. There's a lot of that in these matches. I really have a big memory of that, of these matches after, yet another defensive fuck up.
When mistakes were made,
or I passed the ball there. Why weren't you running? Well, why did you pass it there? There was a lot of that going on.
Jim McLean made a cracking comment. Well, I read it in Duncan Ferguson's book, and he said the likes of Richard Gough, he says different people have got different personalities. He said, but when team wins, Richard Gough, he's looking at himself in the mirror. When his team gets beat, he can't see. There was loads of that going on.
Yeah,
and but the other one too that you said, David, which I do think is bigger, and we saw all the way through, certainly through the 70s, you win a treble, and then what do? And then certainly the next time you don't learn from it, and then you end up having guys who've played all of these games. So many of the key players are all injured and so on. You've got some young ones coming through, like Sir Greg had a chance to do a double one, and he just failed at the end. But again, once you've won that treble, they should have looked at it, because there was people finishing last season on their knees, and I just think they missed a trick leading on to this season.
I keep going back to something that Martyn said earlier when he was referring to what Trevor Stevens said. And I keep going back to that this was a group of guys who, when you're successful, it's very hard to blame yourself for things, because your first instinct, you have to be a survivalist anyway. You have to be tough and have that shell to get there. I get that. But this was a squad that looked like we'd had this huge party and this was the hangover, and everybody was sort of looking round and saying, well, you're to blame. Well, it's not me that's to blame. It's this guy. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of arms being thrown up in the park. It became a slog. Previously, there had been this. We talked about that match where the players were, having fun. I think it was against Aberdeen, and there's high fives, and they're just supremely at the top of their game. This is the antithesis of that. This is now everything's a slog. Everything's difficult, and you get over the line in certain matches. Martyn, you referred to 2-1 at home to Hibs, and you kind of get by. But then what happens when you don't kind of get by, and you're not saying, right, I need to up my game? We had 8 or 9 players who needed to up their game, whereas I felt that we had players who were almost going, well, at least I'm fit. That I could be on.
I'm back.
I'm here. I could be on the treatment room. And I suppose this is not unique to this Rangers side. This is something that's been said about many, many clubs. It's amazing how many more injuries you get when the team's doing badly. And there's the chicken and egg theory. I get it. But George Graham said, he said, you tend to find that the injury crisis comes after a series of bad results rather than causing a series of bad results. He said, because when the team's doing well, people will play through it. I just felt that there was a whole undercurrent of blame at this point. Players blaming each other, the crowd blaming the players getting annoyed at the crowd, and it just, as I say, it's a hangover.
It was only that final fighting spirit that Walter had, obviously, and a lot of those guys had, that will see us through. Because looking way back, you would go, my goodness, look at this, they win the league, they win another trophy. But to me, that was the only thing that got us through, Davey. Just the fact that you'll see there'll be some key games in the Cup and so on, and it becomes they've just managed to lift it. But you can't keep doing that all the time.
No, it's that in a poor league, and it does catch up with us in the Scottish Cup final, of course, because as you know, we keep banging on about this. Rangers had aimed sky high that first couple of seasons. They'd aimed sky high under Souness, and all right, we hadn't always reached there, but look where we did reach. Now we're not aiming sky high, and when the European carrot was taken away completely, then the players are basically, it becomes almost like 95 this season. They go in and they do what they have to, but I just the whole place was like, I remember this season as being quite grey. Like when I think of Ibrox, normally in my mind I think of sunshine. Right, or I think of a Wednesday night game where it's glorious under the lights. This whole season I see is being conducted in perfect weather for swing bowlers, Martyn.
Yeah, I mean, I get completely what you said about the football teams and excuses with injuries and cause and effect. I would probably lie on the cause, to be honest, in this specific example. That team were running at the ground for 2 years. They were not prepared with sports science in mind, shall we say. And players simply, I mean, McCoist and Gorham were broken, literally broken. 2 huge pieces of that particular jigsaw. You get muscle injury after muscle injury after muscle injury.
There's a lot of operations as well, was it, Martyn?
Yeah. The muscle injuries, bad condition.
Yeah, they were just done. And thankfully, in terms of Hateley and to a lesser extent Ian Ferguson maybe, you've got guys that are just kind of pushing through. But that league run, that awful run of form, when you weave Levski into that, it makes maybe a wee bit more sense. How then do we explain the form in the League Cup, which took place at exactly the same time, but it was exciting, it was dramatic, and it was ultimately successful? Early rounds, we see we get Dumbarton every single year. They lacked the usual festival of goals that Rangers would normally enjoy. 1 at home to Dumbarton, 2 away to Dunfermline. But the quarter-final tie at home to Aberdeen was where the action really started.
So we're underway in front of a capacity crowd here at Ibrox. A marvellous setting again as Durant breaks into the penalty area. Penalty kick's been given for the tackle by Brian Irvin. So the first minute of the match, a great chance for Rangers. 1-0 to Rangers. Mark Hateley gives them the perfect start. Jess did well. Goss in trouble against Booth. Down goes Booth. It's a penalty to Aberdeen. He's done it again. Aberdeen are back in level terms, and Joe Miller is the scorer. It's a corner kick to Rangers. Scramble away to the edge of the area. Thundered home by Ferguson. He's been hovering there all night in these situations. And that was a magnificent strike with his left foot.
Alan, I'll come to you first on this Aberdeen game in extra time. Now, this came right after the Kilmarnock defeat in the league at home that we discussed with Andy and John last week. The pressure's really on, but Rangers are ahead in less than 1 minute. Superb. It's Durant instead of Duncan. It's Durant just coming that bit deeper and releasing himself, getting into that area untracked, causing problems. Rangers were great. Dunk comes on late on, and he has a great effort, an audacious chip off Snelders in extra time. But I guess it's his namesake Ian who makes the difference. A super goal. But I thought there was more football from Rangers in that 120 minutes than we'd seen in the 6 games that they played already. And we were in the League Cup semi-finals where we haven't missed since 1980.
It was a throwback, Martyn, to last season. As you say, we Durant running, him and Hateley, Ian Ferguson, just some of the... I think obviously we get the penalty early, they equalise, but as you say, Fergie gets the winner. But it was... Ibrox was rocking as well, I remember that one too. And it's funny, it was just so... Probably not in colour, Davey, but I know what you mean. But, that was probably the one time where if you'd actually have looked at that and someone had said that was from 92-93 season, we'd have went, oh, aye, they beat Aberdeen. So, yeah, for some reason, again, as I say, I don't know whether it was just because of the importance of the Cup and we were going for consecutive, was maybe 6 trophies in a row or so on. But, yeah, that was, I really enjoyed that one. That was a cracker, yeah.
Great night, Davey. Again, where did it come from? Whatever group that was fit that night said, right, we're Rangers. The league will take care of itself eventually, but you could go out the Cup tonight, so
yeah, I think
let's fucking wind it in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that's the immediacy. And, we've talked about this lack of competition and the inevitability of us winning the title. The players felt that too, they're human beings. And I think there's always a suspicion with this Rangers squad throughout this entire era. We turn up through the winter. So look, when the other teams are dropping, we know we're going to put our foot down. It'll be there when we need it, basically. So yeah, I think it is. It's exactly that. It's the immediacy of this challenge, and the immediacy of and there's more electricity on the night. I remember in these matches than there were in the league. So everyone was more up for it, and there was just a sense that this was bigger than the average league match because, with all due respect to the opposition, you sort of knew you could make mistakes in the league. You couldn't make mistakes in a one-off cup tie. So yeah, Rangers do play pretty well. Maybe this whole season comes down to hunger, Martyn. Maybe yes, injuries and whatnot, but maybe it does come down to, as Alan mentioned there, they'd gorged for a bit. And then they didn't get to extend that metaphor to breaking point. They didn't get the actual dish they'd ordered, which was Europe. But this night there's a pace to the game that they haven't been playing at.
Yeah.
There's a cohesion in place that there hasn't been. And again, maybe it's I'm overstating it, but I think Ian Durant brings an awful lot of that into the side when he plays in these big matches, because we know the sort of the ability that he had in these crucial games to be a decisive part in it. And I think he was just a joy to play with for other people. So I wonder if that was a factor in it as well. Now, we know he can't do that for 44 games over a season, but he would pick and choose when he needed to deliver it and almost ration what he did have to give at this point in these matches. But this was a very good performance against a good side, and we deserved to go through. There's zero doubts about that. We played really well. You mentioned Ian Ferguson there, who is a little bit undersung in this period when a lot of things around him were not working well and partners were changing left, right and centre. He did offer a bit of stability in there and play some lovely... I remember his passing this night has been really good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The draw for the semi-finals was conducted live on Reporting Scotland, where it pitted the Old Firm together. The only issue being that Hampden was being renovated, and with no suitable alternative in Glasgow, Walter Smith and Celtic's assistant manager Joe Jordan would have to toss a coin to see which ground would be used, albeit split 50-50 for purposes of neutrality. Jordan won the toss, and it was announced that Parkhead would host, before both men were informed that the toss was just to see who would call the real one. Jordan did, lost, and so Ibrox would be cut diagonally for a classic cup tie on September 22nd.
A very dangerous ball. Houstra, and a good challenge there, and Peter Houstra is in serious trouble here. Referee Douglas Hope calls him across. Shake of the head. A red card indicates the end of the match for Houstra. Here's Trevor Stephen. Now Stevens. Closed down by Slater. Race here. Durant with Galloway. A bit of wrestling there by Durant, was that? Hateley scores for Rangers! .20 minutes of the second half gone. Made by Durant. Finished by Hateley. And Rangers snatch the lead.
The final whistle. Rangers are in the final. Mark Caithley, the goal scorer. But it really was an outstanding overall Rangers performance when the chips were down.
Davey, again, it came after a bad result, the one at Pittodrie. And again, a Rangers team that looked unrecognisable. There should have been an early penalty like the last round. How Hateley didn't get a penalty from that foul by Bonner, I have no idea. But it didn't deter that first half performance. It had invention, it had pace. You talked about in the Aberdeen game, no reward. Maybe that frustration got to Hoostry. That fresh air swipe at Tom Boyd. Red card deserved. That 10 minutes after was the only Celtic pressure there really was. They couldn't make anything count. They're going for their first trophy since 1989, by the way. And then when Mike Galloway, he tries to play like Paolo Maldini in the left corner, the game turned. Durant robs him, rolls it right into the path of Hateley. There's just this outpouring of relief. I was moved. I had my season ticket was in the Govan, and I was moved to the Copeland front, I think, so right behind that goal. And
you hate the Copeland too.
I know. Despite the tiredness and turmoil that we've discussed over the last 50 minutes or so, Rangers are in yet another final. And again, they pulled it out of the bag, even down to 10 men. It was another good night.
I'd also like to point out another motivating factor for our players at this point, and people can laugh, but I have heard this and I will explain to you why from the horse's mouth. They were also on really good bonuses in the cup. And these were difference makers. Like, I think a couple of weeks ago, Derek McInnes was saying in 96, 97, he played every round up to the final, and then he didn't make the squad.
Yeah.
And Walter called, he says, that's 25 grand I'm missing out on. And at that time, that's a lot of money to them. And he said that Walter actually called him in and said, look, I'm putting Davy Roberts on the bench. He's done a lot for me over the years. One day you'll be in my chair and you'll understand it. But you're still getting the bonus, right? So that was his way of managing it. So that's maybe a factor. But if you can't get up for a midweek semi-final against Celtic, then
chuck it.
Get up.
I
mean, if you can't get up for that, good lord. And it was wild, the stadium, because unfortunately, as you say, half of it was given over to that lot, which was very frustrating indeed. But at this point, I wonder who dreaded a Rangers player being sent off more in a match like this, us or them.
I know.
Hoostrit's entirely, just frustration. He lashes it and he has that kick at Tom Boyd. I can't have too much criticism for Peter Hoostra on this, because I'd like to kick Tom Boyd. Like now, if you told me where he was, I would quite enjoy aiming a kick at him. So I totally get that, but it's stupid, it's petulant. And he of course gets the red, and you do go, oh, because it's a huge advantage to them, and I think it does take us a little bit to adapt to it. Although again, I'll say for the players, to give them credit, that they kind of hunker down for that 10 minutes that Celtic come into it, and then once they realise, Martyn, I think this is when the momentum absolutely swings. Yeah. Once they realise, oh, hang on, that's all they've got. Right, that's literally what they're bringing a water pistol to this fight.
Do you not think the volume goes too? Sorry, David, the volume ironically goes with Rangers fans, because suddenly we need to get back in. If anything, we then push them on too. Yeah.
Well, I didn't see the incident, so I don't know what he's been sent off for. So I'm just going to assume, as a Rangers fan, that it was
unfair.
It's the Illuminati. I'm just going to assume that he didn't do anything wrong. And then I got home and the game was on Sports Scene on the highlights, and I watched it and I went, fair enough. But at the time, I was apoplectic, and I wasn't alone. Everybody's like, "What we do? You should have had a penalty," as well. So you're feeling that you're up against it. And one thing you cannot take away from this Rangers team is that when it was galvanised like this, it not discovered because it knew it was there, but this steel would come out. And then you've got, Big Hateley. And again, the second the goal goes in, you just knew, didn't you? You're nervous in the moment, but there was this sense of they are not coming back from this. And again, this is the scars of the last few seasons for them. They're like, oh, we're not going to do this again.
It's just repeating. Yeah. It's 92 over again. Alan, you've been to Ibrox many times. Ever remember a night quite like that, when it's split in half like that? It was an odd occasion.
Shoot me down, everyone. I preferred Old Firm games because when I started going, the ground was pretty much half and half. At either Parkhead as well. We'd get bit of the jungle, bit of the stand. So I actually preferred that at the time. So it just makes it all the sweeter. I know it's a pain now, and things have changed with all the season tickets and so on. But I loved, and at the time, obviously, years ago, the attendances would have been bigger as well in the old stadium. So, but East Enclosure as well, where I was, you can just imagine that, Martyn, can't you? It's just, especially down at our side as he robs him and just plays over to Big Mark as well.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. And as you say, after what had happened before in the cup final, down to 10 men and so on, they must just have been thinking, what do we have to do? And as I say, that's the thing where we just seem to be able to just dig in at those wee moments and just capture that spirit. The Aberdeen one with this one as well, and then we'll see it going on. Yeah,
they go the opposite as well during this period, Martyn. That we're going to talk about good performances from Celtic at Ibrox, over, but when it doesn't really matter, that's when they will perform in these matches. And this one, we just mentioned there, maybe it was the immediacy of it that got our players up for it. I think maybe the opposite with them, that while for our lads it's like we can't make mistakes in case we get knocked out, it's fear of mistakes with them in case they get knocked out. And I think that's the difference, because there will be some decent performances from them, but they will come at some very pointless times in the main.
Indeed, so that meant we were through to yet another final where we would play Hibs at Parkhead on Sunday the 24th of October.
Ferguson to Durant. Headed it on pass, there's Durant. The opening goal for Rangers. Brilliantly finished by Ian Durant. 10 minutes of the second half gone. And this was superb play from Rangers. And it's a goal that has to be said, which has been in the cards for some time. Careless one inside. This is Keith Wright. Needs help in the middle. It's turned in by McPherson. Hibs have equalised. Dave McPherson utterly dejected there. And the noise you hear greets the arrival on the track of Ali McCoist. So the alteration being made is that McCoist joins Hateley through the middle. He's just signalled to Ian Durant to move to that position wide on the left. So David Robertson will launch one perhaps into the penalty area here. The long throw looking for Hateley's flick on. That's McCoist with the acrobatic effort. McCoist does it for Rangers. He scores in the most spectacular fashion, and Rangers go in front again. Well, a man with a golden touch. He's done it again, as he's done so frequently in the past.
It's tempting to explain this good cup run in the context of the kind of dismal performances we've talked about to be the work of individuals just turning up in big moments. Hateley definitely, Ian Ferguson probably, and Durant so often that kind of big time player. He opened the scoring after 55 minutes with that delightful goal. That would be to ignore, though. I think genuinely good team performances we've talked about against Aberdeen and Celtic, where even the beleaguered individuals like Maxwell came up with good saves in both of those games. The football was far better, more focused. But the Durant goal, the work of two different give and goes through the middle of the park, a brilliant bit of football, brilliant bit of team football that he was on the end of. But I guess what gives credence to the initial argument that Rangers just had players that simply popped up was what happened with the ultimate talisman himself. He is a lucky bastard. He is sure to go through life like that, so there's no point in me spoiling it, said Walter Smith after the match, still shaking his head in disbelief. Look, Rangers were worthy of that cup win. Still old frailties, never too far from the surface. The equaliser came from Maxwell. I can't deal with the back pass. In trouble. McPherson, unfortunate, I guess. He couldn't really get out the way of that. It's an own goal. And with his side kind of rocking late in the game, Smith looks to his bench for someone who's just very presence, could still inspire something special. McCoist had made his first start for 5 months at Starts Park on the 2nd of October. A slight reaction had delayed his second until a 2-0 win at home to St Johnstone the week before the final. He'd forced the own goal against Wraith Rovers. He wouldn't claim it, but understandably, he's nowhere near match sharpness. Duncan Ferguson's injured, this time with an ankle injury, so Smith opts for Durrant in that forward role. But he said, look, he'd shown enough to suggest it could come on and make an impact, but I didn't think of this. This was the type of cup final winner that can really only be found in comic books usually. Less than 15 minutes after replacing Hoostra, the cup was won, in Jock Brown's word, in the most dramatic fashion. Robertson's throw-in, as we know, it just comes through this beautiful, low, dying sun, only flicked on by Stephen Tweed, but beyond the control of anybody before it entered the vicinity of McCoist. David, he's still facing Robertson in the main stand touchline. He jumps to chest the ball up before turning 90 degrees to his left to meet it on the way down with an overhead kick. There are 4 players within 3 yards of him at all 4 sides, but they were just simply witnesses to history. Jim Leighton, the 35-year-old, this is his renaissance, was the big story in the build-up to the cup final, was caught in 2 minds, but the arc of the shot into the side net, and he probably could have stayed on his line and not got it. And it was this just the kind of comeback that only McCoist could deliver.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's it. And for younger bears who wonder about our utter reverence of the guy, it's exactly that, because this is the kind of thing he did. He was a headline grabber. He was somebody that made things happen. He just did that. But of course, Ali's going to come on half fit, if that, after months out. He's going to come on into this match. And in our memory, I think we have forgotten the previous appearances, Martyn. I think you're right there, because it adds to the legend. But, let's go with that one. Print the legend and all that. But of course, he's going to waddle onto the park, still a bit overweight because he's not down to his fighting weight yet. And he's not just going to score. And it couldn't be a
scramble, you know what I mean?
It couldn't be a penalty to win the cup. It couldn't be. I mean, the one time he scores a penalty to win a cup, it is, of course, a hat trick against Celtic in an Old Firm. So he's already got a last-minute League Cup winner. Remember, against Aberdeen in 3-2. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the ball comes to him. He's back to go. And if you look, actually, the defender's not doing anything wrong. The defender is where he should be. He's goal side. He's saying, right, okay, the options are lay it off or lose possession. Those are the 3 options. And he somehow contorts because it's not just about the angle. He generates a bit of power. Right, I mean, it's not an Albert's, but enough power, because if he does the usual that players do when they try something like that, it kind of totters into Leighton's arms. It was just so good. And the whole stadium are just like, the Hibs fans are going, I knew it. Like as soon as he came on, they knew it. And we sort of suspected, not that he would do that, but yeah, here comes Ali, you're going to be all right. It was a magical moment, and it just, he already was a legend at this point, but it just burnishes that legacy even further. That of course he comes on and he scores the winner in a cup final with that goal. His story was replete with moments like that. They weren't one-offs. They weren't, we all love the Lovenkrands last minute cup winner. Of course we do, and we remember that moment. But Ali had, he had a video of these. He'd like loads of them. And I must admit that I hated Jim Leighton with a passion. And you're right about the build-up. So I've still very fond memories, for example, of his shell shot looked after that 7-0 at Ibrox. So this was great. Where he sort of goes to scream at his defence, but his defence is sort of, they haven't done anything wrong. It was just one of those moments. I wish they'd chased the linesman though, for old time's sake.
Yeah, that would have been good. I was over in the Celtic end, David, just behind obviously where he scored. And I remember, and the thing with McCoist, like you said, see if somebody had said 5 minutes before, He'll bring Ali on, Ali will score the winner, it'll be spectacular. You wouldn't have get shot down because you would be going, fucking, that would just be like him. But it's as if he had one of those magic pens, you're a wee kid and you go, right, Davey, I'll throw the ball in here. Okay, I'll do this. You'll all stand there and it'll go in. But it was just like in amongst everything else, it was just him creating his own magic, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's exactly. And like I say, you could almost watch the footage, watch the Hibs end. Their fans are just collectively going, I fucking knew that would happen, because he had this magic aura about him. And it's still, though, on top of that, we spoke a lot here about the kind of intangibles. And Martyn, we can talk about, he had a magic, he had an aura, he had this ability, he had luck, as well.
Oh, God, aye.
But he has technique, and he was a very good goal scorer. And that, of course, is the key point in this. But it was a magical moment. And in a season that isn't exactly jam-packed with them, I think if you ask anybody,
this is probably it, isn't
it? Highlight.
Quite rightly so. He broke the record for League Cup winners' medals, broke Cooper's record. He moved on to 8, and he would pick up a 9th later on in the decade. And his joy, I think, was unconfined, and no wonder after scoring a goal like that. And as was that of his teammates, this was not just an important goal in a cup final. Ali was back, and no embrace was longer than the one between himself and Hateley, reunited at last. So, boys, we got a cup win coming in the back of 2 league wins in a row. The first of which was a very impressive 3-1 win at Tannadice, Peter Hoostra being superb. And now the lethal partnership is back. A corner appeared to have been turned. Waiting around that corner was a Celtic side who had outdone themselves in the Calamity Stakes by managing to have an even worse start to the season than Rangers. Their 2-1 defeat at St Johnstone on the 6th of October meant that they'd only 2 wins to their name from the opening 10 league matches, none at home, and it was enough for Liam Brady to call things quits before he faced a very hostile AGM later in the week. The assistant Frank Connor managed to steady things a wee bit, narrow home win to bottom of the table Dundee, and then a 1-1 draw away to the league leaders Hibs. Couple of things to talk about at Celtic, I guess, in the build-up to this game. The Tuesday before the trip to Ibrox, they got their new manager, Lou Macari, former hero, of course, as a player at Celtic and at Manchester United. As a manager, mixed career. He would later be found not guilty of fraud. Huge case at the time. However, when he was manager of Swindon Town, who he'd guided through the lower leagues, he'd done a good job in I think his first, if not one of his first managerial roles. He then went on to West Ham, but he had to leave West Ham once it became known that he'd placed £1,000 on his Swindon team to lose to Newcastle United in the FA Cup, which the FA called a foolhardy misdemeanour. It's inconceivable, I think, that a manager would work again in the climate of the current day. But he was back at the club in the managerial role. An unenviable task of managing the football club while the holding company stumbled from one shambles to another. Waiting in the wings was a Scottish exile in Montreal, Fergus McCann, who had put together a proposal worth close to £20 million to bail Celtic out of their ever-worsening predicament and re-energise, I guess, the fortunes both on and off the park. He involved £8 million of his own money, a few backers. There was going to be a public offer as well. It was dismissed as a fantasy by the Kelly White family pack that were clinging on to power by their fingertips. I think they laughed at McCann's credentials as a big Celtic fan because he was embarrassed when he wasn't actually aware there was an Old Firm semi-final going on. So they were more and more resembling a cartoon football club, David, and no one really gave them a hope coming to Ibrox. But there was talk now, and there would be, that Celtic might go bust.
Yeah, there was, and it was precarious. It was month to month, and of course they eventually get they eventually go because of a tribunal setting a fee for a player that was larger than they expected, and they simply just did not have the money to pay it. But yeah, there was this talk. I think there was a sense that it wouldn't happen because there would be someone who would step in. But it was very, very funny. Again, our reaction was slightly different to what theirs would be. I don't recall anybody, as a Rangers fan, frothing at the mouth and demanding that they no longer exist. I think that we
just laughed. It was mockery.
It was mockery.
Yeah.
But in terms of the fixture itself, Martin, you're absolutely right. I don't think anybody foresaw this coming. Celtic seemed a very heavy place at this time, and it crushed a lot of people. Liam Brady is one of them. That it most certainly did. It seemed quite a dispiriting place because there was always something. There was always a story in the paper. There were always some embarrassment. There was always a poor result just around the corner. The players looked just eternally frightened, really, in the main, in these matches. That again, they're being crushed under the weight of everything that's going on at the place. And this is not unusual, or it happened to us unfortunately later, but you've seen it at other clubs. Players will always say, okay, it doesn't really bother you, you just avoid the noise, but yet that isn't borne out by what we see whenever there's this negative atmosphere around a football club. Macari was, I think, a bit of an odd choice. He was certainly not one that their fans were particularly enamoured with, because although he was an ex-Celt, which was probably the reason why he got the job, in all honesty, that he did have this poor reputation. I don't think they liked him very much because of the manner of his leaving. Yeah, and I think also the way that he had spoken since. He's a very, there's a Strachan-esque.
Yes, maybe a Manchester United thing.
Maybe it is, yeah, but there's definitely a spite. Maybe it's a wee person thing, because he's a wee person and so Strachan. So maybe it's that chippiness that wee blokes do. When they're swinging at you and you're just holding them by their head and they can't get to you. It's like that. But there was this sort of undercurrent with him of, Alan will maybe speak to this. I'll pass it over to you. But do you remember that he not had a lot of good things to say about Scottish football? Like, he used to go on St and Gravesy and slag Scottish football quite a bit, and he had a column, Martin, in Match magazine.
Yeah.
In
the,
which
the gospel match, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I remember him saying in Match magazine, well, that's soonest down now at Liverpool. He's won a few leagues in Scotland, but that doesn't count for anything. We'll see how he does in a proper league. And he's back in Scotland. I think that there was this unavoidable sense of he is only here because that his career has absolutely hit the buffers down south. So I think Celtic fans kind of felt that they've got somebody that they didn't rate that highly, but they didn't particularly like either, and that's very rarely a good combo.
Alan, can you remember what you felt? No, we'd have to go over the Macari thing. I think David's kind of summed it up nicely. More interested in the initial reaction to McCann as a potential, saviour, I guess, because Celtic were descending into absolute calamity.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of Kelly and the Whites, obviously for years, were the laughingstock, weren't they, in the kind of biscuit tin, and as David said, obviously you knew they were struggling financially. I must admit, kind of took it with a pinch of salt to start with when he came in, and it's this wee guy with the bonnet, the specs, isn't it, really? But I think when you found out a wee bit more, as more things came to light, there was just okay, there might be something here. The guy may have some money and may have some backing, but there's still going to be a bit of a feud, and that continued for I think a wee bit before ultimately the guy kind of won over. Give him credit, believe it or not. He actually said, I think was it something like 5 years, he had a plan.
5 years. I'll get my money back, and I'll give you a stadium and a team to be proud of, basically, and I'll go home.
And he, as I say, even friends that I've got that were Celtic fans at the time and all that, they bought into that. And I think as well, was there not a kind of shares thing as well that came as well, which went to, but no, and that's the thing that people, I think even Celtic fans that I knew, they said that the one thing we would say is the guy said he was going to do X, Y and Z, he did, and he went away. There's a lot of criticism of, he's made a bit of money, but certainly in a lot of their eyes, it's he came in there and he actually saved their club and went on from there. But like David said as well, at the time when they were struggling, and I think the bank, it was within so many hours, I wasn't in well, that's it, let them die, whatever. I was more just I was just loving the fact that, Celtic were there, we were kind of winning things and so on. And I did recognise the importance as well as, in Scottish football, believe it or not, you actually need the old firm. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But
yeah, well, this particular Old Firm game was garbage, and with 20 minutes left, it kind of summed up the season so far for Rangers. Haley picked up a knock in the cup final. He played on regardless. Gary Stevens injured his hamstring, covering for someone else's mistake, had to go off. Trevor Steven had to go off because he had a cut face. Alan McCoist was in the right place at the right time to bundle home, put Rangers in the lead. So a poor performance with yet more injuries, but an individual picked up the baton when required. Now, this is a pattern that is all well and good until another individual drops it. It was, of course, Maxwell. Rangers only had the lead for 3 minutes. Pat McGinley just lofted in, shall we say, a speculative effort. Rangers keeper came out positively. Maxwell comes out, he claims it, but he drops it on the way down. Like Jerry Craney's around him, maybe put him off, but it's John Collins that's the beneficiary. He seems to take forever to put us out of misery with the outside of his left foot into the corner. And then the unthinkable happened in injury time. Collins whipped in a corner. It's a brilliant corner. Maxwell jumped, was never close. Brian O'Neill, I think, was just there. It was 2 yards out, kind of come off his head. Maxwell got the blame for that one, David. He would have got the blame for unemployment and NHS waiting list figures at this stage. But the fact that O'Neill was allowed to get in front of John Brown and shoot McCall should not easily go without remark either. For all our ups and downs and for all the kind of disappointing draws, because it was mainly draws, really, and that Motherwell result, this Celtic team doing that in that way felt like another level.
Again, it's just something that wouldn't have happened to us the year before, to be a goal up in a big match, to lose, and to lose in the last minute, that you know, the biggest kick in the nuts that football can possibly give you, is losing a derby in the last minute. It was a sore one, and I think the calamitous state of both the goals really summed it up. These are not Todorov goals, Martin.
Oh Christ, no.
These are, you know, really preventable. Basics not being done in all level. The goalkeeper now is just looking like a shadow, just completely looking like a shadow of what he could be, actually. I mean, I don't think anybody realistically expected him to be Andy Gore Mark II, but I think he was better than he showed. But, you know, we talk a lot about jerseys at certain clubs being heavier. I think he's a great example of that. But after making the poor decision for the first one, what he clearly doesn't do is shrug it off. You know, it's clearly still in his mind.
Confidence is
gone. It's not a poor decision for the first one. He comes out to claim a ball that he should claim. He gets it, and then it just fumbles. He drops it.
But I didn't say it was a bad decision. I said it's still in his head.
Right.
That he's made a mistake, so it's affecting the rest of his play. He doesn't just shake it off and go one of those things in the way that Gorham does. Right? Yeah. Gorham would go, I made a mistake. I won't do it again. And this is, you know, but you mentioned, I think you're fair to do it. Maxwell will get the blame. Did get the blame for a couple of reasons. One, it you know, goalkeepers tend to. Secondly, that he doesn't have credit in the bank the way the other guys do. And thirdly, because, you know, people are beginning to think we've got this guy from Motherwell, you know, who had one good game famously in the 91 Scottish Cup final, and we've signed him on the back of that. But the defending is atrocious. But the defending all season from set pieces, I thought, was pretty poor.
It's shocking.
Yeah, I mean, any sort of, and it is a good ball, by the way. You know, that's one thing.
Super ball.
Yeah, it's not an overhit or, you know, but you didn't really get the impression that the players always were quite aware, or their communication was good on who was whose man. And this is pre-zonal, folks, so we can't blame that. You know, this is just people not doing their jobs and switching off at vital moments. And again, not taking responsibility, because the responsibility was not shared. Nobody came out afterwards. You mentioned two players there who could have come out and said, look, Ali's made the error, but I should have, you know, I should have dealt with that. They haven't done that. And it was just, they were such a poor side. And the other thing about them back then was whenever we did lose to Celtic, and it could be, as you say, Martin, you mentioned before, when we were like 30 points clear or whatever, right, that you would be subjected to the week of that's the Celts are back. So with a new manager in, we were going to be subjected to this absolute bullshit in the media about how they turned the corner and everything was rosy and golden again. But it was like, how can you know, what's happened to you? Where's your sense of pride? It was just so different from what we'd seen. We were an empty sail.
Alan, your thoughts on that particular low ebb?
Aye, no, it was a really hard one to take. I do remember when you go 1-0 up as well, you're fine, and as you say, the first one comes in, and I remember for one side, I actually just moved over to the kind of end of the enclosure towards the Copland Road, and I thought I'll just stand there and I'll wait to the end and then go down and just looked as the corner came across Martyn, and it, and like Davey said as well, I remember going round behind the Copland Road and that going down towards the buses, and everybody, as you say, Maxwell was getting the blame for, and I know the mistakes, but I don't know. It was like typical.
Yeah, well,
and I think
that happens with a keeper. We're recording this the day after Rangers have dropped 2 points at Easter Road, 9 men. I had a similar feeling that day it's going to happen. They're going to get a winner. There was an inevitability any time there was a cross ball to deal with. The keeper, the porous defending, really so far that season. Yeah, you just felt it was coming.
You did.
And David, just interesting, you said, we were going to get this. It is laughable in hindsight, and possibly a wee bit laughable. The Celts are back and all that. Next week, we're going to talk about the New Year game. Celtic were 2 points behind with a game in hand. Like, they were not blown. They're not sitting in ninth place or out the water. It's a weird old season, and Rangers are not going to push away until the early spring, really. But we've done a lot tonight. I asked for brevity. There was no chance that was happening. There's too much to talk about. But interesting, David, that this gets overlooked. Maybe because of Ali. Maybe because of the Galloway error and Big Haitley capitalising on that, and McCoist's overhead kick. And there's still enough around this time. They're waving silver at us again. That it's easy to forget just how grim this was.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there was the sense of it can't last forever. I don't think the other teams, Martyn, believed that they would be able to sustain a challenge, because nobody hit that run. You guys mentioned earlier about the cutting at each other's throats. Nobody got into an Aberdeen 91 run or a Hearts 86 run. Nobody got into that of putting even 6 or 7 games together,
which would have made a huge difference.
Which would have made an enormous difference. No, none of the rest of them did that. So I don't think and I think the Celtic reaction I mentioned there was mostly bravado and trying to take a moment in the sun while the sun was shining, which is understandable given the roof was both figuratively and literally leaking on them. So I can understand that, but none of the rest of them, I think, did believe that they could win the title.
Yeah.
And I think that plays a big part as well, that at one point Rangers will get their act together. We think that, they think that, and that psychologically it's very difficult for people to break the programme, and this is the effect of the last 8 years at this point. This, as you mentioned, the revolution's over, but the results of it are in, and the results are Rangers are going to win the title. None of you are good enough to do it. And again, there's also the thing that if it really got dicey, we would go out and buy.
Yeah, but even forgetting everyone else for a minute, Rangers fans just we reminisce a lot. I mean, social media is full of it. Thank goodness I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't. But I just think this gets overlooked in terms of just how horrible it was, because there was some absolutely grim football being played. Guys, I think
sorry, just sorry but I'll just counter it slightly and say you're right. This doesn't get discussed because this season doesn't get discussed.
Yeah, it's very much forgotten about.
Ugly stepchild.
Yeah, well, absolutely, guys. We have made a sterling effort on a very interesting 2 months, and I hope we've shed a wee bit more light on it for those who have forgotten for good reason, and those who maybe weren't quite aware. Thank you, David.
Yeah, not a pleasure, but actually, it's amazing. Alan touched on this earlier, that here is a season in which we do win the league and the League Cup, and as I added in there, we just never. We talk about Ali's goal and then we move on, and that's a whole season with 2 trophies boils down to that,
which shows you really where we are. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Martyn. Sort of enjoyed it. Maybe took a wee bit more of David's pain, but I've got big shoulders, pal.
Yeah, thank you very much. The Rangers would lose to an inferior Celtic side on occasion throughout the period of dominance, mostly, as David's mentioned, in the final meeting of the season where nothing was left at stake. So to lose one at home at such a precarious stage of the season to a side this poor, new manager bounce or not, was a big shock. It's not championship form, Richard Gough remarked without much need afterwards. When he was pushed on Maxwell, all he would say was, everyone saw what happened, bad mistakes were made. There's always a desire for a scapegoat, but the problems Rangers had were much more than just Maxwell. 2-0 up with less than 20 minutes to go in a soaking wet Tynecastle the following Wednesday night, Rangers contrived to take only a point. And yet, despite this woeful form, they were only 3 points behind Aberdeen that night, back in fourth place behind Hibs and Motherwell. It was a situation that underlied the overall balance of power. Rangers were at their worst for years and were still in the hunt for a title. Before Souness, the quality at the top would have just pushed Rangers well behind a pack that was too good to be reeled in. Years later, when the interminable two-horse race was established, that kind of form would finish a title race in November. At this moment in time, however, it was a mere grace period for Rangers to cope with some injuries. No other Premier Division club could find the consistency with which to punish Rangers for their hangover. No other Premier Division club could find over £1 million to reinforce their challenge with a striker from Tottenham Hotspur. Until next time, bye for now.